There's an old saying that says that in order to know where you're going, you got to know where you come from. That's how the people back in the day would say it. And what embraces knowing and realizing where you come from is history. And I think that we've got a serious vacuum, particularly in the African American community, as it relates to history and the role that it can play in the progress and the development of our community. And even more seriously, we got a show enough problem with our young people understanding history and the plight of slavery and the effects of slavery and the civil rights movement and the marches and things of that nature. So one of the reasons that I'm motivated by the opportunity to interview this young man who's a phenomenal guy is that he embraces and delves in history a whole lot because he realizes the importance of history. Now, I'm going to let this guy introduce himself, but, he's too humble. Michael Thurmond, not PhD, not EDD, but JD. Michael Thurmond, JD, who also is, I can put some other letters after his name. How about CEO of Dekalb County? And how about ETS? I'm making that up. Entrepreneur because he owns a radio station. I mean, he just all kinds of things. But this really seriously. Oh yeah, no, yeah. How about POL? You know, Politician. He ran for what you run for, Mike? You ran for
the U.S.
Senate.
Senate. I
He
ran for
ran.
the U.S. Senate in
He
2010.
ran for the U.S. Senate. And how about DOL?
Yep, I was
Because
the
at
labor
one
commissioner.
time he was the
Yep.
commissioner for the Department of Labor. So he's a phenomenal guy, very humble guy, but phenomenal. And oh yeah, wait a minute. How about SUP? Weren't you a superintendent one time, man?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, I was superintendent. Yeah, yeah. See, you calling the roll on me, Alan. You calling the roll, man.
Yeah, he was the superintendent. So as you can see, he's a phenomenal guy with a long and varied and distinguished history of involvement, in the community and helping people. And oh yeah, wait a minute. Uh, how about LEG?
Right, that's right. I was in the Georgia House of Representatives. I was a
Yeah,
legislator.
he was a legislator. So I mean, they're gonna need to increase 26 letters in the alphabet. Might not be enough when we start describing. when we when we start talking about this guy. But anyway, this is Michael Thurmond, CEO right now of DeKalb County. But I'm gonna add three more letters. AUT, author. So he's also an author and he's written some books. But he particularly likes to delve in history, and there's a special place in my heart for history because I know the more we know about our past, is the more we'll be able to address the actions and programs, initiatives in which we need to deal for the future. But we're going to talk about specifically after I don't know how much more he can do after that introduction, but if he can find a nook or a crook, he can go ahead and add to it. But we want to just talk about his being an author and a historian. And his latest project, he has delved into something that's real historical and very, very important. And he has written this book about the founder of Georgia, Mr. James Oglethorpe, and dynamic book. But I'm gonna let him. And the reason I'm talking so long is because I'm winding him up, and so he's going to begin with a little more biographical information on himself, and then he's going to delve right into this very, very significant book on James Oglethorpe, founder of Georgia. Take it away, Mike.
Well, first, thank you, Alex. You, your lovely wife, your family have been my friends for as long as I've been out of law school. back in the late 70s, when I first came to Macon, Middle Georgia, you always embraced me. No matter which scheme or title I was working on, you were always there for me. And we share a love for Black-owned media. And I'm just honored. What about FRI? I'm Alex's friend. That means so much to me.
I thought you were going to say Friday.
That means so much to me because, and I just wanted to, one thing I wanted to say, I thought about it. I just want to publicly say thank you for supporting me on the good nights when we won, but you stayed with me on the nights when we came up short. And we've been friends now for 30, almost 40 years. And I'm just honored to be with you today and to say, be able to go on record to say thank you for all you've done for myself, and more importantly, what you've done for Macon, Middle Georgia, and the state of Georgia. You are a historic figure who really been the godfather of Black entrepreneurship and business ownership in that part of our state. So thank you.
Go ahead. Let's talk about why you're here. Let's talk about James.
I'm here.
Yeah. All right.
I was going to put up one of those screensavers so you can see it, but I'm going to just show it. This is James Oglethorpe, father of Georgia. We all know who he is, but the subtitle is what's interesting. The reason I'm here today, from slave trader to abolitionist. And this, of course, is my third book, but this book looks at the origin and the founding of our state. We all studied Oglethorpe in school, and that he founded Georgia to help debtors. But what we don't study and was not known is that Georgia was the only one of the 13 original colonies that prohibited slavery prior to the American Revolution. And James Oglethorpe, because of his relationship with these two Black men, was one of the first, if not the first, white British colonists to oppose the enslavement of Black people in North America. That's not the James Oglethorpe that we've been taught. That's not the James Oglethorpe that people know. And rarely is it discussed that he had these relationships. He understood and he was taught that Black people were not subhuman, that they were human beings. He embraced that. And he argued and tried to share with other British colonists the recognition that slavery was evil, it was ungodly, and that Black people would fight to secure their freedom. And that's the James Oglethorpe that I spent 27 years researching. Wow. Back in the 1996, I went to England. I visited his grave site. We went over there with 57 other Georgians, 56 other Georgians. And near his grave is a plaque. And on the plaque, Alex, you know, you look at the person's tombstone and you can really know things about him. That was commissioned by his wife. And on his plaque, this memorial plaque, 8 words: he was a friend of the oppressed Negro.
Wow. Wow.
James Oglethorpe, we never knew and were rarely, if ever, taught in the public schools or private schools for that matter.
Based on what you're telling me is that he had this relationship with 2 Black people. Let's talk about those 2 Black folks, because evidently they may have influenced him or helped him in one way or the other. But I know it's addressed in the book, but let's talk about that scenario.
Well, the first one, Yuba Suleiman Diallo, the young man with the turban, was captured on the west coast of Africa and enslaved in February of 1730. He was transported to the Maryland colony where he was enslaved on a tobacco plantation. Well, this young man convinced the man who enslaved him to allow him to write a letter to his father back in Africa. He writes a letter to his father. The letter is transported by 4 or 5 white enslavers across the Atlantic, 4,000 miles, back to England. The letter falls in the possession of James Oglethorpe. Oglethorpe is so impacted by the contents of the letter he arranges with the man to transport Diallo to England, where Diallo ultimately meets the King and Queen of England, is set free, and ultimately is returned back to the west coast of Africa to what is now modern-day Senegal. Oglethorpe set in motion this man's freedom from reading a letter. Diallo was the first free Black person to really engage with the King and Queen of England and the other elites, and showed them that all Black people were not subhuman, cannibalistic, but was intelligent. Think about it now, he wrote a letter. And the letter was written in Arabic. He was a Muslim. Oglethorpe had the letter translated at Oxford University. The contents of the letter changed Oglethorpe. When you meet Oglethorpe, he's the deputy governor of a slave trading firm. He resigns from the firm, he sells his stock, and comes to Georgia and founds a slave-free Georgia colony.
Wow.
Because he read this letter.
Wow. So now who's the other guy?
The other guy is Olaudah Equiano. Now, if Barack Obama, you can argue, was the most consequential Black man of the 21st century, Martin Luther King was the most important, influential Black man of the 20th century. Frederick Douglass was the most influential Black man of the 19th century. Equiano was the most influential Black man of the 18th century. He and Oglethorpe became friends and acquaintances, and Oglethorpe became his advisor and ultimately introduced him to a young white lawyer. And Equiano and this young white lawyer, Granville Sharp, founded the former abolitionist movement that ultimately abolished slavery in England in 1833, came back across the Atlantic and played the key role in the abolition of slavery in America in 1863.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because a lot of people don't know and have not heard that. Did I hear you say abolish slavery in England?
First, yes, in 1833.
So that means that there was slave trading going on in England also?
Well, England created the slave trade.
Wow.
They were the pioneers of the slave trade. They were the most dominant slave trading nation, beginning around 1563. They began to traffic enslaved Africans. So when we think about slavery, we initially give England a pass, but England pioneered the slave trade by capturing Africans, taking them to the West Indies, the Caribbean, and then to North America, to the colonies.
Wow. Wow. Well, that's very, very interesting information. I understand that you're going to come to Macon, and don't forget, before we finish this conversation, to let people know how they can get this book, and we can stroll it on the stream, because, man, with the climate of the country, with certain people in the country, saying that it's not important, for us to know our history. And I just don't mean that from a Black perspective, but I don't see how one can minimize history, because it predicts and shapes the future. And if, in fact, you're going to ignore that, both actually and theoretically, then I just feel like that's a detriment to our country. So I just want to thank you for delving into something at this point. I hear you coming to Macon.
Oh, looking forward to it. Coming to Macon, Middle Georgia at there at the Middle Georgia State, is at Macon State University. We are excited about being there. I also visit the public library. I think it's the Washington Street branch. I'm not looking at it, but it's just good to be, because Macon is such a historic place, Bibb County. The history of this state, and particularly of Black people, played out on many different ways there in Macon, Middle Georgia. And you mentioned I was in the legislature. I'm honored that I served with some very historic political figures out of Bibb County. When I came to the legislature, Billy Randall, Representative, now Judge Randall, now Senator Lucas. Well, both of them were in the House with me when I came to the legislature. And of course, the late Robert Brown, I worked with him when I was at DFAC. But you mentioned something. See, there are people who don't want us to know the truth. See, there are people who don't want us to know that Black people and a small minority of white people fought against slavery. The things that we know, you think about Black history, and you think the cornerstone of African-American history is that escape of fugitive Black freedom seekers would escape from south to north, right? Follow the North Star to freedom. What's not told is that thousands of Blacks in Georgia and South Carolina escaped south to freedom. That not Canada, but Florida was the prime destination. When we think about the first 150 years of history, Florida was controlled by Spain. Spain was another country. So if you made it to Florida, the Spanish king had issued an edict in 1693 saying that any fugitive slave from the British or the Americans who made it to Florida were free.
Wow.
And if you had a choice, think about it, thousands or hundreds of miles to get to Canada or 3 days walk to Florida, which way you go?
I'm walking to Florida.
You walking to Florida. And between Florida and Georgia, the Seminoles were a fully assimilated tribe of red and Black people. And there were numerous towns of free Blacks in Florida. The most famous was Fort Mose, right outside of St. Augustine. And the Seminoles, primarily led by Black warriors, fought 3 major wars against the United States and were never defeated on the fields of battle.
Now, that Seminole, that was a black.
Red and Black, they were assimilated.
Oh, yeah.
Primary war. Your grandmama always told you what? Boy, you got Native American blood flowing. Didn't they always tell you that we got Indian blood in our veins? Didn't they always say that? So the Seminoles intermarried with Black people, and they were called the Negro Seminoles.
Okay.
And think about it. We don't think Seminoles in South Georgia, right? We think Florida. But Okefenokee is a Seminole word. It's not Creek, it's not Cherokee, it's Seminole. And if you think about it, west of Bibb County, southwest, is a county named what? Seminole County. They're at the corner of Georgia and Alabama, Florida.
So you spelling that Seminole?
Seminole, Seminoles. Just like the Florida State Seminoles, that's the mascot of Florida State University.
But I just said I'm glad you're pronouncing it correctly, because we've been erroneously calling it Seminole.
Well, it could be that too. It's Seminoles. It just depends. Okay. You know how we do.
I sure do.
It's Seminoles. So what this book talks about is Oglethorpe, but it lays out how African Americans and their allies, some of them were white people, some of them were Native Indian, allied themselves to fight for a common cause. Because see, southeastern United States, if you think about the southeast United States, you had England control the colonists from north all the way to South Carolina, along the coast, Virginia, New York, Pennsylvania, those. Out west, you had France that controlled the Louisiana Territory and parts of Alabama. Then in Florida, you had Spain. They were fighting for control of the southeast United States. And the enslaved Black people used that struggle to their advantage. And they were allied themselves with different segments in order to gain their own freedom.
Right.
And so they were with the Spanish. We fought with the Seminoles or the Seminoles. We fought with them. During the Revolutionary War, Blacks in South Carolina and Georgia aligned themselves with the British. They didn't fight with the Americans. They fought with the British. During the War of 1812, which is we think the most boring war, The British occupied St. Simon's Island and Cumberland Island, and some 3,000 formerly enslaved blacks in Georgia escaped to those islands and left on British ships after the war was over.
Man, that is so phenomenal. We're going to take a quick break. And then I got a question about how encompassing, as it relates to all this history you've been telling us, that this book is. But we're going to take a break. This is a call to action. I'm your host, Alex C. Havisham, interviewing Michael Thurmond. We'll be right back. Ready, Central Georgia.
Save the date.
The Black Business and Consumer Expo going to be coming up at the Macon Coliseum.
September 21st. The theme for this year's expo is
Together We Rise.
Because this event represents our collective rise as a community. The event will feature an active marketplace, educational breakout sessions, thought-provoking conversations, cultural entertainment, community resources, and giveaways. This will be the largest gathering in Central Georgia for Black businesses and youth entrepreneurs.
So if you want a prime location for your booth,
Become a vendor. We are now accepting applications for the Black Business and Community Expo 2024.
and then Macon Coliseum.
Saturday, September 21st from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m.
So put it on your calendar.
Engaging in Black commerce, Black community, and Black culture. For more info and to reserve your spot,
Go to cgcdb.org. We're back with this phenomenal discussion with Michael Thurmond, CEO of Dekalb County, amongst other titles that he has. And we're in a real deep conversation and, ain't no shame in my game. I just want to let you know, man, you educate me. I'm supposed to be the interviewer. Now I'm being the told. because
No, I didn't know it either. I didn't know either. So no apologies. I did not know either.
Yeah. But this is phenomenal information and I appreciate it. Now, how you gave us some overviews of some of the historical elements of the past and the seminars and what Spain on and what happened out west with the Louisiana and what happened in Canada. Now, how much of that is embraced in this publication, James Oglethorpe, founder of Georgia, A Founder's Journey from Slave Trader to Abolitionist? How deeply do you delve into that peripheral history of what was happening during that time?
Well, significantly. Now, James Oglethorpe came to Georgia in 1733, where they ran him out of Georgia by 1743. The pro-slavery Georgians despised James Oglethorpe. Let's just be clear. We celebrate him now, but when he was alive, he was despised. He was the target of a smear campaign that ultimately undermined his authority and ran him out of Georgia. And he went back to England to face a trial for treason.
Wow.
Which was punishable by death if convicted, and financial ruin because Parliament stopped providing money to support the Georgia colony. So Oglethorpe paid for it himself and they wouldn't reimburse it. He was not a popular person. He was one of the most unpopular people you can imagine because the great majority of whites in Georgia and in South Carolina wanted slavery because they knew that was the only way they could make money in this wilderness was to bring in slaves and extract their labor for no cost. So he was run out in disgrace from the state, but he didn't stop fighting from the colony. He stopped fighting, he went back to England, and he mentored Equiano, Granville Sharp, and others, and they founded the abolitionist movement. You asked about the Black struggle. So what Oglethorpe told them though, and see the narrative is Oglethorpe failed. He tried to create a colony, a state without slavery, but he was defeated, he was disgraced, and he was run out of Georgia. That's the narrative. But think about it. You and I, we live in a slave-free Georgia. His idea, his vision is the one that sustained itself. That's the Georgia we live in today. The people who opposed him are now footnotes to history. He said that no society built on the backs of enslaved laborers could survive, that ultimately it would be destroyed. Fast forward, 1865, Sherman marching through Georgia, through middle Georgia, onto the coast. The economy is in ruin. Everything that Oglethorpe predicted came true.
Wow.
And also predicted that we live in a state where slavery would not be legal, and that's the state, that's the place we live in today.
Man, that's just mind-boggling. And then I'm going to encourage everybody who hears this to tell somebody about it. Not only tell somebody about the book, but also tell somebody about this interview. It'll be available, on radio. It'll be available on Alex Habersham, YouTube. It'll be available on makeemblackpages.com. And that's not for the purpose of self-aggrandizement, but it's for the purpose of becoming familiar and recognizing and realizing the importance of history and how important it is for our young people to know about it. Now, we got a responsibility, and that's how I live my life. That's why Michael has spent all these years researching this history, because we want to make a difference. And in order to know where you're going, you got to know where you come from. And I think this book plays a significant role in familiarizing us with where we came from. And hopefully we can use this as a springboard to encourage everybody, really, of all colors and ethnicities, to recognize and realize the value of working together and realizing the kind of sacrifices that were made for us to be a free country and free people and live. We still the best country in the world. I don't care what they say. And, we just need to understand that. So I'm just deeply appreciative, Dr. Thurmond, of, you're taking the time. 20, man, you've been researching this a long time. And these are the details that are very interesting. And I'm thinking, that I want to be your driver when you're in Hollywood making the movie. You know what I'm saying? Because I know it's
I know. Yeah, we could have some good times together like we used to.
I know it. This is a call to action. I'm your host, Alex Habersham, having interviewed, and then I'm going to title him author, Author, author Michael Thurmond, because we're talking about his newly released book, James Oglethorpe, founder of Georgia, and all of the peripheral information that's associated with his being an abolitionist and the role that he played in seeking freedom for slaves and from slavery. This is a call to action. I'm your host, Alex Habersham. Have a great day.
www.makingblackpages.com